So, hey, everybody, we're going to wrap up Castro with this presentation. And I know you're all terribly sad, but, we'll deal with it as best we can. I'm trying to move the laptop soon. That glare from the mirror behind me, because I'll just have to lean in front of it. Anyhow, Castro comes to power on January 1st, 1959. And this, of course, is the end result of, agitation against Batista, who's been there a while. Basically, Cuba has been dominated by the movement of the mafia, large businesses from overseas, particularly the United States. Castro has, gotten the support of the people, and now he's going to try and change things. Well, so it's January 59. He's got support of the lower class who have been exploited the most. He's got the support of the middle and the upper classes. The question is, what's it going to look like from this point forward? And there are some changes that are going to happen inside Cuba. It's not going to be immediately 180 degrees different than it was before. You can see the picture that's there. Now Cuba is free. As in other words, it wasn't before. We welcome our American friends, Fidel Castro. Not exactly a sign you'd expect to see there today. Of course, Fidel's not even around anymore. There's still signs up for the casinos. They're still, I guess, looking to make some money. But that's not going to last very long. Castro, of course, had lots of criticism of the casinos and other things because they were exploiting. They were not paying the Cuban people very much. The profits weren't going to Cuba; they were going outside the country, and that's again something he wanted to change. Now, this video that would play here, because I'm playing it in Google Slides, it won't let me do that right now. So I'm going to put it up as a separate thing for you to link on. It does show some of the changes and the repression that's going on in Cuba when Castro comes to power, how he deals with some of the people of the old regime that were seen as individuals who exploited the people and whatnot. So I'll leave that for you. But you could see in the first 100 days, and again, we always think the 100 days first with FDR going back to 1933. But in Fidel's first 100 days, the mafia is chased out of Cuba. They don't have any legal standing, basically, because the entire governmental system is about to change. The casinos that they ran, operated, and everything else are closed. Anything that's related to mafia-type activities, drug sales, prostitution, and so forth, are going to be clamped down upon, whereas before, the Batista government kind of ignored what's going on. People are getting paid the lowest amount overall. People who are maybe working on hourly wages are going to see theirs go up. And he's going to lower rent for the poor, and basically, of course, the landlords and the owners are going to be really upset about that. But who are they going to complain to? The government is completely different. It's in the hands of somebody who's more for the lower classes. They're going to go seize all the utility companies that have been accused of exploiting the people and make them essentially responsible to the Cuban people as well as the Cuban government, and work on their behalf as opposed to shareholders that don't even live in the country. Teachers are going to be sent out in the countryside, whereas before teachers were in short supply unless you were in a city. He's going to take a look at what's going on and say some people need to go outside the cities, and he's going to turn to some younger people even who are capable of doing some middle to lower skills, even just learning how to read and write or knowing how to do it, are going to be sent out because there's such bad illiteracy in various rural parts of the country. He's going to go out and start bringing everybody's level of education up. Same thing is going to happen with doctors. He's going to take doctors that are pretty much up until this point, clustered in the cities, and he's going to move them throughout the country so that everybody has access to doctors and medical care and health-related problems the people are experiencing that prevent them from achieving their full potential are going to be essentially eradicated as much as he can do it. Now, he doesn't officially say he's a communist. He doesn't want to scare away the United States or any other capitalist countries that may want to invest in Cuba at this particular point. The Cold War, of course, is going on. Communism exists only in Europe, from the Soviets on over into Eastern Europe, as well as in North Korea, as well as in, I guess at this point, what we would call North Vietnam, as well as China. But, realistically, it's not until the United States attempts to overthrow him by supporting a group of Cuban exiles and revolutionaries, people who'd left Cuba in the revolution who thought they had a lot to lose, and this would include people who, had been part of the elite before. They're like, oh, man, we're going to lose everything. And they like going to Miami, for example. And so they relocate to Miami and they want to go back to the old days, the days where, it was beautiful and great and capitalism / corruption reigned. And they got, some of their people to say, let's go back and take Cuba back from, these people who they think are not fully supported by the people. And then the Bay of Pigs invasion happens in February of 61, and it's a complete failure. So he's going to try and hold off on that public identification of being a communist until December of 61. He's like, look, the United States is out to get me. I need somebody who's going to protect me. Who's the United States' mortal enemy? It's the Soviet Union. So let's go with that. So initially, of course, Cuba is supposed to be led, with the needs of the people in mind, but things quickly begin to change as he moves towards that communist system and starts taking a lot of assistance and a lot of advice from the Soviet Union. He's going to start to make it kind of more dictatorship-like every single day. He's going to be in charge of the armed forces. He's going to be the prime minister. It's kind of difficult to do both of those high portfolio positions at the same time. Granted, Cuba's not getting directly involved in a lot of wars or conflicts at the moment, but a lot of the people who are associated with Batista are going to be tracked down, and they're going to be arrested, and they're going to be oftentimes jailed and oftentimes executed. And he says we're going to have elections, and there are elections that are going to take place. It's just you're not allowed to be against what would be the Communist Party. Anybody who was against Batista was sort of like shoehorned into one party. There were actual communists, and there were people who just didn't like Batista, but you had to be a part of that one group, and anybody else who wasn't would find themselves getting arrested. And so that made it really hard for them to campaign, made it really hard to go out there and achieve any real support. And so that anti-Batista group officially becomes the Communist Party of Cuba in 1966 and would become the dominant and only political party pretty much through this day. One of the things that the Soviets are going to do is they are so happy to have a little window into which they can look at the United States only 90 miles away. They're looking for any friends they can get who are going to make things difficult for us. It gives their Navy a place to go in the neighborhood, so to speak. I mean, the Russians today, just like the Soviets previously, had missile-carrying submarines that would go out along the East Coast and go down to Cuba and go into port and get some fresh food, loaded on board the submarines, give the sailors a chance to get out, get some sunshine, chase some Cuban women, and it was a nice alternative to going back to the frozen Soviet Union. And it allowed the Soviets to become more of a worldwide presence in this part of the world with Latin and South America. So they were very happy with the location of Cuba in particular. A lot of times, smaller scale revolutions that communists would say they wanted to support, Cuba ended up being a proxy for the Soviets. And, so the Soviets are willing to trade sugar for oil. And I don't know about you, but, sugar is not as expensive as oil is in general. The Soviets basically didn't care that what they were supplying was so much more in value because under the terms of actual worldwide communism, whatever somebody specializes in is what they produce and they give it to everybody else. And essentially it's like all the supplies of the world are going to be put into a big giant pile and everybody's going to be allowed to take from it what they need. Nobody's supposed to get greedy. Everybody's supposed to have equal access to things. But, the Cubans produce sugar. They don't have a lot of oil supplies. So, they get it from other people or they get military equipment from the Soviet Union because they can build it in the Soviet Union, whereas in Cuba they can't. Most of their trade is going to be with the Soviets. That's not with the Soviets is typically going to be with Eastern Europe. And as a result, it's going to be a communist bloc where they will even get together once a year in a centralized thing called Comecon. And the Cubans are going to send a lot of their sugar over to Cuba or over to the Soviet Union. It gets, sent around the world to various places that need it. And again, the Soviets send supplies down to Cuba, which keeps pressure on the United States and makes us nervous and very upset. All this is going to go really well for Cuba up until the time that the Cold War ends. And when the Cold War ends and the Soviet Union implodes, suddenly that unequal trade distribution is going to be really bad for Cuba. And they're not going to be able to get the heavily subsidized amount of supplies they've been getting up until this point. And they're going to be introduced to the world economy, on world prices and really have some problems. So when Castro comes to power, how is it that he's going to maintain power? He doesn't have a big island. He's got a lot of people who are just happy Batista's not around. He begins clamping down on people who are against his rule. Getting his word out, radio speeches, later on TV speeches, some of these things last 4 hours in length. I don't care who your favorite president is. I don't care who your favorite politician is. Listening to them for 4 hours is going to get really old really fast. Castro was known for these long speeches, and whereas they were, well thought out in general, 4 hours. I mean, come on, seriously. I don't want to listen to anybody for an hour, let alone four. So, and I know I just said that, and you all thinking, oh, wait a minute, we have to listen to you for more than an hour. Yeah, you don't have a choice. But in this case, he goes out and gives these long speeches and harangues the people and tells people what should be and fires them all up and everything else. I mean, what else they got going on at the time? He also, though, I give him a lot of credit, something that I have not seen any American politicians at the national level doing very much. He made himself very approachable to the Cuban people. He would go to like a rural village and he'd sit down and say, hey, what's going on? Well, my well needs to be fixed. We're not getting enough water. Or the tractor we've been using over here is, without a gasket, we can't operate it until we get a gasket. And he would look at like, a cabinet member and he's like, you need to get this fixed by tomorrow, or you need to get this fixed by next week, or something like that. And he really began solving the needs and the problems of the Cuban people, and really did listen to their concerns about what it is that they really needed to be successful. And, that approachability, I think it's fantastic. And again, in a smaller place, it's a lot easier to do that. I don't really imagine the American president, whether it's Trump or Obama or anybody else, having a lot of opportunity to go out in a country of 300, 400 million people like we got, and being able to have a lot of candid conversations with people that represent the entire country. Again, it's a smaller country, number one. It's number two, a smaller population. They got mountains. It's a lot of agricultural based areas. So population density isn't exactly huge. But again, I give them a lot of credit for going out there and trying to be approachable to the people, as well as listening to what their issues are and trying to get those fixed. More so in his early days. In his later days, he wasn't doing that so much. Of course, anything that's going wrong, you need to blame somebody. Whether it's Trump blaming the Democrats or the media or somebody else. Castro in this particular case, was able to say, oh, we don't have enough food on the shelves. It's because the United States has an embargo against us, which will come soon enough. Oh, we don't have enough this, that, or the other thing. Once again, it's all the United States' fault. If they would just treat us fairly and let us operate the way we want to, then we wouldn't have these problems whatsoever. So anything that's going wrong, he blames on the U.S. Propaganda-wise, during Castro's rule, it'd be very common to see his face being used in a lot of things. You see that mural painted on the wall of the building over there. But you're not going to see he's not a dictator in the classic sense where his picture is going to appear on stamps or coins or other things. It's not a cult of personality where it's all about him. Honestly, he kept talking about, we would say the revolution, typically ends when the guy comes to power. He talked about the revolution from the perspective that until the goals of the revolution are achieved, until everybody's equal, until everybody's doing well, and can live, in harmony for the most part, then that revolution is still ongoing, and it is not something that is over until that is achieved. Now, here's another video, and again, this one I can't show you because it's just how it works. But I am going to put it up there separately for you to take a look at. In this one, it talks about the difficulties of keeping the Cuban people supplied with things. He's going to have a minister of industries who's supposed to be, cranking out stuff for the people. President of the National Bank, all going to be wrapped up in one person who frequently, people like wearing his shirts or doing other things without really knowing what his politics were. And that's Che Guevara. He was himself an ardent communist. He's a revolutionary. He doesn't like getting official titles from Castro and having these jobs. He wants to go fight for communist revolts around the world and overthrow governments and engage in what we would today call terrorist activity. And nonetheless, he has these positions, and the government is going to be responsible for making all the decisions about how much of something is going to be produced. So let's ask ourselves the question right now. Let's say, for instance, we're looking at Mountain Dew. Is Mountain Dew an absolute requirement? I mean, truthfully, it's not, as much as it's me. Do we need more toilet paper produced? Absolutely. However, they would decide in January, we're going to make X amount of rolls of toilet paper, and that's going to be it. And what if there's a national shortage because of a pandemic that appears? Well, that's too bad. They said they're going to make 14,000 rolls of toilet paper that year, and that's all they're going to make. In the United States, for example, how much toilet paper is produced? I'm going to imagine right now every paper manufacturer, every pulp mill, and everything else that leads to the production of paper is working overtime to try and get people supplied around the country. Is there a lot of need right now for golf balls? No, there's not, because during the coronavirus thing, not a lot of people are out playing golf. So the market dictates how much of things are going to build. Some people who build things like Ford builds cars. Right now, Ford's building masks for healthcare workers because those are in greater need, and people aren't too interested in going to a dealership and looking at the latest Ford. So the market dictates what's going on. But in this case, unlike in both Mussolini and Hitler's regimes, those are right-wing things. They love capitalism. This is a communist-oriented thing. It's a left-wing thing. And the government plans everything despite what the needs of the people may change or end up being. Massive hurricane shows up. You're going to need more plywood. You're going to need more, a lot of other things. And again, they made their decision for the year, and the government figures everything else, not what the people are willing to buy or pay for, or how much they're willing to pay for it. And again, everybody's supposed to think about the revolution as this ongoing thing to make both Cuba as well as the people a perfect group of people. So we're not supposed to see greed anymore in Cuba or anything. If you've got, using toilet paper as an example, which, a lot of people are struggling to find right now, if you have one package of toilet paper that has enough toilet paper to last your family for 2 weeks, you don't need two packages like that. You need one. But if you're sitting there going, I haven't seen toilet paper in the grocery store for 2 weeks, and I just saw some for the first time, I'm going to buy 2 or 3 packages because I don't know when the next time I'm going to see it is. That's not supposed to happen. Everybody's supposed to govern themselves to be, what the revolution is looking for, which is that individual who is mindful of the needs of others and everybody shares equally. Well, greed is part of who human beings are, or is part of what human beings are. And, not having that mentality is going to be an awfully hard thing to get people not to do. What are they supposed to do? Well, all workers are supposed to receive equal pay. That means a doctor who might have paid for his medical school education, maybe his loans to pay back, is going to make as much as a garbage man. It's going to make as much as, a teacher, as much as, somebody who's flipping burgers at McDonald's, if that was happening. The ideal that Che Guevara was talking about, and there he is on the money over here underneath me. Everybody should try to achieve this status of being the new man, whether you're a woman or not. And in this case, it'd be that person who is motivated by the best interests of others, and sharing equally, and all these idealistic kind of things where everybody shares because that's what communism's all about. Rent gets abolished. Again, if you're the guy who has been working for years to pay off the mortgage for an apartment building and you finally own it, and the way that you're going to get your money back, your profits, your money, so that you can pay for things you need or even the maintenance of the building, you're supposed to get rent. Well, now there's no rent. You can't use that to pay for mortgage payments or, your retirement or, fixing up the second floor's, leaky roof. Now that's on you. You get to pay for that. And, if you want to complain about it, the government can take away your apartment building if you really want to complain. So, even how much land a family owns, some land is not as good as other land. What do I mean by that? Imagine having a farm on a mountain. Okay. You got vertical distance to go up. It's not flat placed potentially. So, if everybody's going to have a limit on how much they can own, yes, that enables more people to own land so they're all equal. But, what if you've got land on the beach? What are you going to grow? Shells? So by the time that you get to 1963, 4 years after Castro comes into power, 70% of the land's owned by the government. And that number is obviously going to increase as time goes on. Hold on a second. Sorry. In 1968, again, trying to make everybody equal. No more family stores are allowed to be owned because that makes family one potentially more well off than family number two. You're not allowed to have a private restaurant. It has to be owned by the government if you're going to have one. Grocery stores, again, anything that's going to really allow somebody to have a better position in life than others is going to be gone. They want the government control these things so they control the distribution of different supplies, but also so that nobody has an advantage over somebody else. Farmers markets are banned. Self-employment is banned. You can't work for yourself. You have to work for a business tied to the government. So let's ask the question: if you're not allowed to really, I don't know, benefit from your own hard work and your own incentive and things like that, are you really going to work as hard? If we told you everybody's going to get an A, no matter how much work you put into studying for things, I imagine most of you would probably just not study very much because what's the point? There's no incentive. Same kind of concept goes on here. If you're going to work really hard because you want to go to medical school and then you want to, become rich or become a lawyer and charge a lot per hour, well, it's not going to happen now. If you want to go buy that apartment building so you can make, charge rent, become successful and well off, sorry, can't do that either. If you work in a factory, and you get the same pay as a guy who makes 10 items a week and you make 50 items a week, what's the point of working hard? And a lot of people began essentially messing the system up, not intending to bring the entire economy down, but there was no incentive. People didn't care about work quality. People didn't care about going to work. I'm still going to get paid because everybody gets paid equally. And it's going to represent real challenges to the government trying to run things. And it's going to be a real problem. To try and combat that, you have an organization called the CDR, the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. And these guys are your Gestapo. They're the ones who have spies, in all local neighborhoods and towns and everything else. They want to make sure that everybody's being loyal to the regime. They want to make sure that everybody's, doing the things they're supposed to. If you have kids, there's a program called the Young Pioneers. You're supposed to be a part of that. Is the kid in it? Is the kid not in it? What's the dad do? Is he a member of the party? Is he not a member of the party? Is the mom saying things that are negative towards Castro? How bad are they? And the local, block level person reports to the city person, and the city person reports to the county person. And then eventually the government hears about what's going on. And if they find anybody who's acting against the revolution, they're counter-revolutionary, then they could find themselves getting arrested. Now, there are positive things. The Gestapo was not known, for example, doing things that helped the population very much. And they want to make sure everybody's got the vaccines against various diseases. They want to make sure that people are prepared for hurricanes. They both provide that negative oversight, but also that positive prepared oversight to try and get people to do things that are going to be helpful in the long run to keep the community functioning in the face of any kind of challenges. So there's a negative and a positive aspect of the CDR, very different than what you see in the black shirts in Italy or the Gestapo in Germany, but you very much don't want to cross the CDR. They have something called a cumulative school file that each person in Cuba has. From the time that you were born to what you did in school, to what programs you were involved in, to your level of support for the party, how often you go to church, which they don't want you to do. There's something they keep throughout your whole life that they can use to determine whether or not you're a threat to the regime. Maybe they need to call you in and have a talk with you. But they have a lifetime file they're going to keep on you just because they want to know whether or not you are supportive of the revolution, aka the regime in charge. So one of the things that goes on, status of religion is another aspect of things. Castro's Cuba, it's not supposed to have an official religion. Officially, they say they're going to be atheists. People are looking for individuals holding church services in their homes. The CDR, having heard a report that Raul over here is doing that, might arrest him, and things would start getting negative. There are people who still want to do the Catholic faith, which was important to the Cubans prior to all this. And it's going to be very difficult. I mean, most of the communist regimes around the world are very anti-religion. But in this case, there was a strong religious background in Cuba prior to this. People still want to keep their Bibles. People still try to do things underground. But the groundbreaking thing that really, shows there's a shift going on, a modernization of things. In 1992, Pope John Paul II is going to become the first, and to the best of my knowledge, I mean, maybe it's changed since then, but he becomes the first pope to go visit Castro's Cuba, actually meets with Castro, and shows the regime is softening up and people begin experiencing a little more freedom to do what they want. But I mean, no communist regime wants you to listen to any guidelines about life other than, of course, what the regime puts out. And, everybody equal, everybody sharing things. That sounds like something maybe Christians would be into. But they don't want you listening to an alternative source of influence, which would be, religious teachings from the Bible or the Pope or something else like that. Now, there is a program called UMAP, which is kind of unfortunate. It's a lot unfortunate, actually. We would consider them in a lot of ways to be just like the concentration camps that were established at the beginning of Hitler's regime. Remember, the concentration camps where the political opponents were sent there and petty criminals, lifetime criminals, and so forth, not the extermination camps like we think with Auschwitz. But between 65 and 68, there's a lot of people who are going to be rounded up by the government and accused of various kinds of disloyalty, and they're going to be sent to these UMAP camps. People who don't want to be in the military, which is mandatory. People who are political prisoners, their kids are automatically assumed to be indoctrinated with the same kind of beliefs. People who thought the U.S. was okay, people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, all sent off to these UMAP camps where they were going to be brainwashed, beaten. And you see the official term there is they're going to be re-educated through the liberating effects of collective work. Yeah, that's going to work. Make me work alongside others. It's going to make me renounce my beliefs. I don't think so. In 1968, most people realized what was going on. And because it wasn't very far removed from the Holocaust, it was something that achieved international condemnation. There was no real way to defend it, and Castro kind of had to back off. But you had all these people who had demonstrated potentially their threat to the regime in one form or another. And the Cubans don't know what to do about it really until an opportunity presents itself, and it isn't realized at first, in 1980. Cubans who were unhappy with their situation decided to go try and get political asylum. They take a bus, they crash it into a political embassy, the Peruvian embassy in Cuba there. And technically, the ground that an embassy is on is considered to be the soil of that foreign country, legally, internationally. And the Cuban government says, give those hooligans back, those terrorists back for crashing that bus and whatnot. And the Peruvian government doesn't know what to do at first. And normally an embassy has two types of guards. One is the host country provides some on the outside of the land area. And on the inside of the gates, there would be like from that local country, like U.S. Marines, for example. But when Peru doesn't just knuckle under and say, all right, we'll give these people back so you can put them in a camp or torture them or do whatever, Castro's like all indignant. And he's like, all right, we're going to pull the guards that, keep people from like overrunning your embassy, and we're going to make it more insecure. Well, what it actually does, the people realize nobody's going to stop them if they all want to claim political asylum, which is, like we're being persecuted for our beliefs or some other aspect of things. And thousands of people rush to the Peruvian embassy and try essentially to, ask for political asylum, much like that first group of people were. Castro at this point has been publicly embarrassed. It's quite obvious what's going on. All these people who are, expressing dissatisfaction with the way that Cuba was operating. He's like, fine, let them all go. Well, wait a second. Anybody who's got a dissatisfaction with the Cuban government is going to be allowed to leave. And quite honestly, that's exactly what happens. Castro says, you don't like it here, you can leave. And 125,000 Cubans decide, okay. And, they're like tired of not having enough food. They're tired of political repression. They're tired of other things. And they hop on anything that'll float, and they start going across the Florida Straits, going from Cuba up towards the Keys, and they begin coming ashore in southern Florida. And this is what's known as the Mariel boat lift. 125,000 Cubans flee, just trying to get to a new life where they're going to have an opportunity. You see this overloaded boat that's right there, in that one picture. Castro looks at all this and says, you know what? Amongst these individuals who are leaving, we're paying a lot of money, to keep people in prison. We're paying a lot of money to take care of the mentally ill and all kinds of other people like that. You know what? We could save a lot of money. Let's just throw them on the boats as well. So he takes all of his murderers. He takes all of his, his habitual criminals. He takes the mentally ill. He takes anybody he doesn't really want to pay for, and he throws everybody on these boats along with everybody else, and they literally are floating across on inner tubes. And I remember seeing pictures of cars that were any gap in their construction where water might start flowing in was caulked in such a fashion that it would float, and they would just float along in the water, bring along some food. Not everybody made it. Some perished along the way. Some people would get on like rafts, that they would make out of all kinds of things, or like what, you might have been on as a kid, and start trying to get across up into Florida. And at first, we're happy to have these political, refugees coming up here. We're like, oh man, you've been dealing with such a horrible thing down in Cuba. Part of this is, if you're familiar with the classic film Scarface, this is where Al Pacino's character is going to come across from Cuba into Florida, and they're literally housing people underneath an I-95 overpass. There's like a chain link fence there that keeps everybody penned in until they can figure out what to do with people or have somebody vouch for them. And it's terrible conditions, but they're like, this is temporary. We're in the United States, the land of milk and honey. We're going to be free, and things are going to be great. And now all of Castro's critics are gone. They're not in Cuba anymore. He doesn't have to worry about any kind of internal threats. And it's going to allow him to sort of settle things down. Now, in the case of women in Cuba, women are going to be more or less viewed as equal. They are going to be allowed to take part in pretty much any industry or any kind of job. There is equal pay for equal work. And to make jobs more available for women, of course, in a traditional, stereotypical type scenario, women have to take care of the kids while the guy goes off to work. Well, now women are going to work and they're equal, but who takes care of the kids? So there's going to be daycare centers, which of course are going to be operated by the government, which of course are going to lead to propaganda and of course lead to, socialization of the young of, socialist principles, vocational programs to get women trained as well as guys. But women are supposed to be going out and helping with the harvest. They're supposed to be taking their part in industry and society, moving Cuba forward. They're also still, and most of the messages, also supposed to take care of kids at home, which is kind of going to be an issue. Women are not allowed to become high-ranking members of the military or the government. That's never going to happen under Castro. So glad my younger son had to yell out while I'm recording. There was a women's organization to kind of support the needs of women, to indoctrinate them into the regime and all the great things the regime is doing for them. That's the FMC. It provides educational campaigns to make sure women could read, so that there's like, let's say medicine and, can I give this to a 5-year-old? What are the side effects? What do I need to worry about? Different health programs for prenatal care and other things. But everything boiled down to, look at what your government is doing for you. Isn't it great? And of course, let's say by 1980, people's memories of the Batista regime that ended 21 years before are getting further and further behind. And, they're not going to really have a lot to compare it against to. And they're just going to, kind of like, great, more and more propaganda. This is fantastic. Of course, if you're a kid, you go to school, and just like in Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini, there's going to be school books that glorify the revolution, glorify the leader, pictures on the wall, and that's going to be part of like their algebra problems or their word problems. Out of school, the Young Communist League, I'm sorry, I said previously, the Pioneers, that's Russian. But they had the same kind of things going on that, once again, were happening in Mussolini's Italy with the Balila, or with the Hitler Jugend in Germany. They, in order to appear loyal to the regime, they expect everybody to be a part of the Young Communist League and go out there and be a part of things. It's like Boy Scouts, but it's a lot more political. And, you did that up until the time you were 18, and then you're going to go off and serve your time in the military if you were male. And, it was very regimented, just like what you saw in Italy and in Germany. Now, not everybody, of course, is going to really appreciate what's going on. People who are a little more free-thinking artists are going to be, having some issues with what's going on. There's a program called the Union of Artists and Writers of Cuba. It said basically the writers have to contribute to the revolution through their work, which is supposed to be a weapon against problems that could hinder this advance. Again, The revolution's not bringing Castro to power. It's about achieving the goals of the revolution. So your writing must be pro-revolutionary in nature. Castigate the United States. Talk about sacrifices made by people. And the sharing of things and whatnot. Movies also supposed to reflect this kind of pro-regime message, and it's real simple. If you don't get funding, or you don't get the supplies, or you don't. If you're an artist, you don't get to buy paint, you don't get to buy canvases. If you're a movie director, you're not going to be able to get cameras, you're not going to be able to get film. Here's this movie called PM. They don't like it because it's decadent. People are dancing, enjoying themselves, being free to do what they want. And people are like, dude, we're just trying to have fun. It's a traditional dance we're doing. Oh, no, that's not good enough. So everything had to be done that praised the regime or glorified work or glorified the revolution or communism or things like that, or it just wouldn't appear. And anybody who wanted to protest or complain, again, there's a place you can go, and it's called prison. Another individual, for example, poet Herberto Padilla, didn't like what he saw going on in 1968. He gets arrested. He's tortured, and he has to go and start naming names of people who feel the same as he does at a trial, or, it's going to be bad news for him and potentially his family. Everybody else who's, aware of his feelings knows that it's coerced. He's not the only one. And, a lot of people in the artist world, we're talking both artists, sculptors, writers, etc., are going to not produce things during this middle 70s era. And, again, it's because of a lack of freedom of expression for them to say what it is they feel or to demonstrate what they're thinking at the time. Otherwise, it's going to go very negatively for them. So if you're going to go back and look at what Castro's Cuba was able to achieve by the time we get to year 2000, when they had the support of the Soviet Union, they obviously had support from a large friend militarily who was going to back them and keep them from being invaded again, like the Bay of Pigs was intended to do. Illiteracy is going to be pretty much gone. By the time that you reach 2000, there's virtually nobody in Cuba, aside from a very small child, who can't read. They went from like low 20s to like 99% literacy. That part was successful. They made medical care much more approachable and achievable for people. And actually the Cuban medical system has been hailed routinely, even to this day, as something where Cuban doctors are well regarded, and it's one of the things that the average person in Cuba doesn't have any problem getting a hold of medical care. Which it'd be interesting to see what their numbers are for the coronavirus right now. So the average individual maybe is a little bit better off, and I say a little bit in the sense that they have some education, they have more medical care. But you might argue that it's the results of the embargo, perhaps, that keeps the Cuban economy weak. The United States, after everything was nationalized by Castro, until that everybody gets paid back and whatnot, no trade from the United States is allowed to go down there, and they've been thwarted in a lot of ways. I mean, again, one of their chief products they've got still to this day is sugar. You're not going to make a lot of money off of sugar, and economically, Cuba's not doing the best. But that's the story of Castro's Cuba.